Pod SaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in sassy. Sponsored by LeadrPro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Welcome to another episode of Pod SaaS. Today we have Jonathan Aizen from Amitree.
That's right.
Perfect. So before we go into what we like to do, like a series of rapid fire questions, just to get to know the entrepreneur on a little bit more personal level, why don't you tell us a little bit, like the elevator pitch of what Amitree is and what you guys do, as well as who your target customers are.
Absolutely. Also, the company is a bit of a personal thing as well, because it came out of a journey that I had buying my first home. I had this incredible real estate agent who was so great at his job and so passionate about his job and so valuable. But being an entrepreneur and also a software engineer by background, I naturally observed some problems there. Specifically, I observed that he had to spend a lot of his time doing work that had nothing to do with what made him valuable, nothing to do with what he loved, even though he did it well. And I understood it's not a real estate problem. It's a problem a lot of us have in the day-to-day, where we have all sorts of inefficiencies and things that we need to take care of that aren't core to the strategic value that we bring. And so Folio is our product, and Folio helps people, professionals who are busy with these inefficiencies. In particular, our target audience are people that have to rely on email to get their job done. And I don't mean, use email in their day-to-day. Everybody uses email in their day-to-day. But some people's entire workflow is run through email. So real estate agents, architects, event planners, lawyers, and many others, they have to use email because the people that they're working with on relatively complex processes don't work together at the same company, and they can't all just hop on Trello. A real estate agent can't get a lender from the Bank of America to hop on Trello with them. They end up managing these complex processes by email. Email wasn't designed for that. And so that's where Folio comes in. Folio transforms your email into a much more efficient tool for managing these workflows. And what we do is we go in, we figure out everything you're working on. We understand the relationship between different emails. We know which emails are related to which things that you're working on. And we allow the user then to compress the workflow that they do, taking steps out of everyday tasks.
Interesting. And so it's integrated with whatever the email solution is that they're currently using?
That's right. So it both connects to the back end of your email, automatically creates folders for you, sorts your email. And we also have an in-email client app where you can sort of see information side by side with your email, act on it within your email.
Interesting. So it's like a task management, but leveraging your email to identify the tasks and whether those things are getting completed or not.
Yeah, absolutely. We figure out what projects we're working on. We figure out what the tasks are within those projects. And really importantly, we don't create like new behaviors for you, the things you're already doing. Like when you go to remind somebody about something that's coming up, or you give somebody an update, those are things that still happen. They just happen in fewer steps, right? We just help you automate the work that you're already doing.
Yeah, I can see a lot of like practical uses for that. And is that also like you providing visibility for each participant in that workflow to kind of like see kind of where things are and have a clear transparency of what stage it's currently at? And if somebody's holding up the process, you know exactly who it is.
It's exactly what we do, right? So the professional can create this representation of the project, and they can include other people in it. And those people don't have to be Folio users. If they're not, they can access a view of the project online, but they don't even have to, because they're going to get emails from the user, and they're going to come from them, but they'll have been automated. And yeah, it then kind of creates, a shared understanding of what's happening in any given project. And it's really important in processes like, remodeling a home or buying a home or taking out a loan of some type, that everybody kind of that's involved agree on what are the dates and where are things at and what am I supposed to deliver to you. And this is all stuff that gets like negotiated by ad hoc written emails. And when you can structure it, but do it in a way that like really isn't requiring anybody to change their behavior, that's when you can create a lot of efficiency for people.
Yeah, I'm curious as to how you ended up getting this thing started. But before we do that, let's just go into the series of rapid fire questions, because I want to just get to know you too in terms of like, who you are as an entrepreneur. So do you have a favorite entrepreneur?
I had the privilege to work with a guy called Brewster Kahle. I don't know if you know him. He founded a company called Alexa Internet and simultaneously founded a nonprofit called the Internet Archive. And, he was just so driven by his vision to preserve the history of the web, right? I remember at the time he was like, web pages change on average every 44 days, and nobody's like saving the old versions of the web pages. And so he went on a tear to like save the web, and created the Wayback Machine, which most people know. You type in a web address. But what was so cool about what he did was he found a way to like both create a for-profit to fund his vision of the nonprofit Internet Archive. And the for-profit is Alexa, and he sold it to Amazon. And the reason that Amazon was interested in it was that Alexa had found a way to determine the relationships between websites and created the first collaborative filtering algorithm, which was people who are interested in this are also interested in this. And actually is the underpinning of Amazon's recommendation engine. And also later became, the name of the smart
Alexa.
Speaker.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So Brewster is awesome because he is all vision, but also brilliant, and he's like been part of the web. He came up with some of the early protocols around Gopher and things like that. So it was really cool to see how he made his dream happen.
Very cool. And you said you worked with him before?
Yeah, so I worked at Alexa in 1999, 2000, and then I went on to be one of the first software engineers on the Internet Archive, actually building up the non-web collection. So concert recordings, movies, and all that kind of stuff that they ended up also working to preserve. Created the biggest digital library in the world. Super fun
awesome.
Project to be involved in.
Do you have a favorite startup story? I mean, is that related to that, or is it a separate one at all? And
that was a good one, but actually, there's so many startups I love, and I have a more recent one. I don't know if you've followed this company, Deal. When Amitree went all remote pre-pandemic, I needed a solution to like pay people in different countries. I'd never done that before, and I really didn't want to deal with the hassle of international payroll and compliance and all that kind of stuff. And I stumbled upon Deal. But the reason that I think this is a great company is because I sat down with Alex. This is early on, and he's just like he was just listening all the time and would like make changes to product in real time. And I think I think he still does. I'll text him and I'll be like, this thing is broken. And the guy still goes in and like figures it out and fixes it. And it was so like, the reason I think it's a great story is because clearly the world was going this way. There were going to be more and more remote, more and more global companies. And then the pandemic came, and it's just like this huge accelerant. But to say that it's the pandemic that made their success is like not it. It was really like this spirit and this mission that they're on to make this happen. And I'm so like if there's anything that good that came out of the pandemic, like I love the fact that it accelerated that business. And if there was ever a company doing things right that deserved that kind of like catalyst, is those guys. So I love Deal. And that's sometimes awesome. People tell me that like I'm a sales guy for Deal, but like I think they're doing good stuff. Yeah.
So starting a business is hard. And with Amitree, I'm sure you've gone through different growing pains and different war stories that we can dive into later. There's moments where you feel like your back's against the wall, so is there anything that motivates you or kind of gets you through those humps or hurdles where it's like the 25th hour and, you feel like you've exhausted every effort, but that there's still some kind of answer out there. What kind of keeps you pushing?
You'll hear me say this a few times to other questions. It's about the people. It's always about the people. There have been bleak moments. There always are bleak moments. And I'm just so lucky to be around amazing people. So there was a bleak moment. One of my favorite investors, kind of looks at me and he realizes like I'm in one of those moments where I'm like, how is this going to work? Like, how are we going to make this work? And he's like, there's always a way. that was his, response. And we sat down and half an hour later we had a path. And I found that it always comes to the people. Like if you really, surround yourself with great people and you create an environment where they are, empowered and excited and passionate, then when things get hard, like you don't have to be in it alone. You can turn to them. And I've just been rescued time and time again by the people around me.
I'm a big believer in just kind of like content, like creative content stuff, like, from films to books to music. Stuff like that, in terms of like inspiring me in different ways. Is there anything that you gravitate towards, in terms of like that kind of content, any kind of like books or movies or things that you've digested and maybe like shifted your perspective a little bit?
I try to listen as much as I can. I'm a talker, so I talk a lot. I try to listen as much as I can. And sure, books and music and non-professional contexts too, and people's stories and histories. I mean, some of the most important kind of, I think, I guess, foundational things that have impacted my perspective in a business context are things that my father, who was a professor of social psychology for his entire career, shared with me about his insights into people. And so I'm always looking for those things, and I try to be as open as possible. Just last month, a product manager on our team, Davide, proposed that we start a book club, and we started a book club. And the first book, strangely, that we read is a book called Digital Minimalism, which is kind of like weird for a tech company to be reading a book about like how technology isn't playing a positive role in people's lives. The book doesn't, suggest that we shouldn't use technology. It just suggests we be mindful about it. But it really has gotten me thinking and talking with people in my personal life, my professional life, like, and what does it mean? How do you incorporate it? So the thing that like keeps those creative thoughts going is to try to be open to what people are saying and ask questions about it and and go with it when they propose it,
And this isn't something that I put onto that question sheet, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot and been starting to ask is, how much do you value emotional intelligence when you're kind of going through the hiring process or building culture? Because I hear you talk about people, and obviously said it seems like it's a big priority to you. So curious about that, because obviously we all, I think, traditionally weigh heavily on IQ, the traditional sense of like hiring in past, but I think the idea of emotional intelligence has definitely taken equal, if not like a pretty heavy weight in terms of importance in more recent times.
I don't necessarily know that we look for EQ when we're recruiting, right? We look for people who are, contextually aware and they understand like the dynamics and whatnot. But I would say that I value it really highly. Like we had a really great interaction recently on the team where somebody was able to be kind of like open about what they were experiencing, and the person that they said it to was also open to hearing it. And I think a lot about like I think also about like vulnerability in a business context. Honestly, in a personal context too. Like more often than not, most people are not really able, willing to push themselves to be vulnerable. But it's when people do that great things tend to happen and strong relationships tend to get built. And so I don't know how to screen for it, but it's so critical. And yeah, I mean, I'd go so far as to say that, obviously IQ is super important. You want people who are smart, sharp, move fast, think fast. But you need an environment in which people feel safe to do that and safe to be wrong. And that requires a tremendous amount of compassion and trust and relationship building. And you don't get that without great EQ.
Growing up as a kid, maybe around 8, 9, 10 years old, what did you want to be?
I've always wanted to do this. My dad put me in front of a computer when I was 18 months old, so that I would learn like the letters and whatnot on the keyboard. And when I was 8, I went up to him and I was like, "Hey, I want to do stuff with small letters on the screen," is what I said to him. He's like, "Okay," and he just taught me to write code in BASIC. And both my parents were psychologists, so the first piece of software I wrote was a personal psychologist software that would be like, "How are you doing?" And then it just had like 9 answers that it would like randomly spew back, and it was always like, "Tell me more," or whatever, right? And when I was 13, I started my first web company, building stuff on the web, because I loved the notion of putting something in front of somebody and seeing them light up and get all excited and be like, "I can't believe you could make that. That's so cool." And I really love the idea of then translating that excitement from one person to as many people as possible. So it's kind of like a dream. I've gotten to be a technology entrepreneur my whole life, and it's what I love to do. I mean, it was definitely a hard path, as many paths are, but this is what I wanted to be.
Now being somewhat successful, having more financial means, is there any purchase that you've made, as an adult that would make like that 10-year-old version of you proud?
Yeah, I thought about that question, and it's kind of funny, right? Because like I enjoy the process of like buying things. I think it's kind of an interesting thing, but I don't attribute a tremendous amount of like value to the things
Yeah.
that I buy, purchases that I buy. I buy them because I the things that I want or need to have in my life. And I can't recall as a kid like thinking about it. And I guess it was just privilege, you know what I mean? Like I grew up in a middle class family. And yeah, like in my family, we talked about money and we didn't buy like super exorbitant things or anything. And as like any kid, there was always toys and stuff that I wanted to have that my parents were smart and didn't just buy me everything I wanted. But I guess there was never anything that like I really needed or wanted that I just couldn't have. And I kind of feel lucky in life in that way today. So most of the time I think about purchases that I'm like, maybe I should have gone without that.
Yeah.
Purchases that, maybe I should have been more thoughtful about.
Got it. So nothing like sentimentally, like when I bought a baseball card or like bought like a set of Legos that you really thought of. I don't know. Those are some of like the responses that we've seen in terms of like just going out and making that. I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's like one of the things they really spent like a year thinking about as a kid, and they just went and got it. But yeah. Last question here is the idea of legacy, and I get it can sometimes be misconstrued as maybe like self-serving, but I think legacy can come in a lot of shapes and forms. So it can be like personal, professional, whatever. Another way to think about it, and maybe this is probably a better question, but it's like, what kind of impact do you want to leave on this world?
No, it's interesting because when I first thought about this, I was thinking about impact, and I was thinking about how many lives can I touch and improve, what type of improvements, but I that motivates me a lot. Like it's a big part of why I'm an entrepreneur. But when I think about my legacy, like what do I want to be remembered for? I think about it. I realize that I think about it on a much more like micro level, meaning I want the people that interacted with me in life to feel like I treated them well, like I was kind and thoughtful and there for them and present with them, and yeah, like I think that that's what I really want, which I guess it makes sense. Like my orientation as a entrepreneur and business leader is always about the people, and I see that that's a big part of it is that it's about the relationships that I have with them. So yeah, I want that's how I want to be remembered, as somebody who cared for the people around them.
Awesome. So that's it for the series of questions. But it was a great way to kind of get to know you a little bit more. And I'd like to dive in now. You're living the dream of what you wanted to do as a kid, from being able to start coding at a very young age. That being said, when you came out of college, is this something that you just ended up like working within kind of like that startup environment, and something that you got involved with very early in terms of like not necessarily going out and starting your own business right out the gate, right? But working with a more high risk environment is ultimately what I would say it is. So it's like depends on perspective, but I think like the general population would say probably like going into a business of like that's kind of like startup environment is a little bit more riskier than like working as being a cog in the wheel of a larger machine.
I never thought a lot about risk. I never thought that doing a startup is risky. I never thought that being involved in somebody else's startup is risky. It's not that I thought it wasn't. I just didn't think about it a lot because I kind of followed my interests, and was fortunate that I guess I could take risks, because if you don't have to worry about them, then maybe it just means that you're not too concerned about what happens if something goes sideways. But yeah, during university and afterwards, I was involved with Alexa Internet, and then I was involved with the Internet Archive. And at the same time, pretty much right away, I was working on a really interesting early startup with a friend. And it's interesting, like that whole concept of, I was drawn to it right away. And I remember I sat down with Brewster and I told him, hey, if it's okay in the evenings, I'm gonna explore this idea for a startup I had. It was like a social network for like music. So you would like upload your MP3 library, it would analyze it, and then you would connect with your friends, and it'd be like, oh, your friends that listen to those things are also listening to these things. And I asked him, as somebody who had just sold his company to Amazon, I was like, what do you like? What's your advice? he says, you know, um, uh, be lucky and have good timing. And so yeah, I think like I internalized that pretty quickly, and from there, um, I left after I left the Internet Archive. When I was in my mid-20s is when I started, Dapper, which was the company that we went through the life cycle with. And then right after that, I stayed 2 years and 1 second at Yahoo, and then I did this company.
So how long was Dapper from inception to then selling?
Like we did a year of just like coding and then fundraising, and then we were 4 years from Series seed to exit, and then it was supposed to be 3 years at Yahoo. I lasted 2. And so the whole journey there, beginning to end, was 7 years.
It feels like you've been very fortunate, I think, in the sense of like, I think the idea of not feeling like these are risks, right? I mean, I think at the end of the day, like these are obviously, you can have huge rewards if you're, from taking these types of steps, but not everybody, I think, grows up in necessarily an environment that might foster or like instill that kind of thinking. And so, and even like straight out of university, having a great mentor, like that's got to be an amazing like asset to have, especially as you've, kind of gone through a series of other businesses. So that's awesome. Unique situation for sure. Out of like a lot of these conversations I've had, it's a unique situation. So definitely, appreciative and you probably feel really blessed to have had those experiences. So
I'm grateful. I've always just been very lucky to have people in my life who support me and want me to succeed.
So let's talk about Dapper, because I think like I've talked to a few founders that had successful exits, but like this is talk about like going through that experience. How do you make a decision to decide to exit a company? It's obviously like a big milestone that a lot of founders, when they're going in, they're thinking about, what is the exit opportunity, especially when they take on like venture money, and that becomes a part of the conversation. Was that a path that you had always seen happening, or was it a series of events that led to that decision?
I mean, obviously it's the goal. Like when you're a venture funded company, your goal is to create massive liquidity for your shareholders as quickly as you can. And we had aspirations. We were not, I think, it wasn't our vision, our motive. Like we had something we were passionate about. We appreciated that it was something compelling enough that it had the promise of liquidity outcome, right? The process, I thought, look, I was young. I started Dapper. I was 25 years old. So it's like, I was learning, as we all are on the job. And, when the offer came around, it wasn't obvious to me. Like I was loving it. I was like, I just keep doing this. Let's just grow it. Let's just keep going. And my co-founder, was senior to me and had been through a startup before. And I think he could already sense and see that this was actually a pretty good deal for us. Mm-hmm. But it was really my lead investor from Excel Partners, who was like, he'd been around the block enough to pattern match and know like this is a good outcome for the company. Mm-hmm. This is what and he sat down. We talked about what it looks like if we don't take this offer, outcomes we would need to see in order to like be like to get the same amount of liquidity for the shareholders. You need a bigger outcome, a bigger investment of time, and given that oftentimes venture investors are more geared to the high risk, high reward. I mean, it would have been totally in character for a venture investor at that point to be like, oh no, this is not interesting. It's not $1 billion. Just keep going, and in the back of his mind being like, who cares if it falls apart, because like that's how it works. But again, being surrounded by good people, played in my favor. The folks were looking at everybody's interests, not just their own. They weren't just looking at a philosophy. They were looking at the facts. And I thought that was an incredible lesson about who you marry in the process, right? Like what outcomes you want to have are completely dictated by the personalities and experiences and motivations of the people who own the shares in the company, and who are around you speaking in your ear, right? So that was like one of the key and most important lessons, and was a big part of why I chose the investors that I did when I did, Amitree.
Yeah, having the humility, I think, kind of deferring to those voices and then trusting that you made the right decisions of choosing those relationships to be a part of that journey is extremely critical. And I think it's not enough emphasis on, I think like on founders to do that, where it's like really be selective of who you are bringing in, not only as, investors, but also just advisors and the team that's going to be surrounding you on a day in, day out basis. And providing that guidance, and then just trusting that they know because you spent that time to do the diligence to select them.
Most founders are not in a position to pick and choose their investors. Like if they need to raise money, and oftentimes companies are raising money because they need to, not because they feel like, Yeah. And we were certainly had plenty of financings that we had to do because it was mandatory. But per the advice I got, we were lucky. We were lucky that the people that we thought were great were also the people offering to write checks.
Yeah. So upon the exit, right? Like I'm sure there's a decent financial outcome. You could have spent some time, maybe like, rethinking. I don't know what your priorities are or what you want to do, and how far between like selling the company and I know you said you spent like 2 years at Yahoo as probably part of the deal, but supposed to do 3, could last 2, but out of that, after leaving Yahoo, how much time between then to then starting Amitree?
I started the day
instantaneous. Did you already have the idea or the
yeah, because I bought my house. I bought my house like kind of in the second year that I was at Yahoo, and that kind of got me thinking about it. And my experience at Yahoo, not atypical. There were a lot of good people there, right? And we came in, and I was told by lots of people, like, pretend you're still at a startup, like, don't have sharp elbows, just go. And I ran super hard for the first year. And look, we took our business from 10 to $100 million in the first year and a half that we were there. So it was clearly like, we did good work. But then I kind of reflected after, and I'm like, why? What do we do? What am I doing? Like, and then I had this really amazing experience there, which was like, I was crazy. I was like doing 12 meetings a day, and it was just like nuts. And I was on a plane almost every week. And I was like, you know what? Who needs that? And I just stopped flying, and I just took all the meetings off my calendar, and it kept going well. Like, it just kept doing its thing. And that was kind of like my realization when I was there. And I realized, like, oh, this just really isn't for me. Like, I can't. I have, it's cool that the business is such a big scale, but you have more direct impact. So it was really obvious to me. And so I guess my point in all of that is that by the time I left Yahoo, I was really ready. Like, I didn't need to like go find myself. I found myself at Yahoo by knowing kind of that wasn't for me. And by the way, like when we sold Dapper, I was like, oh God, that was like one startup is a lifetime. I don't need to do that again. But I was ready. I was ready after a year. So.
Wow. So that's basically like there's an itch. There's a perpetual like a problem-solving itch that you have, I guess, that is probably at the core of just who you are. Because like, there's a lot of things that you can choose to do in life, and then going and doing it again, right, must speak a lot to kind of just, what's that serving you both personally and professionally. Because at that point, it's like, I don't feel like, you have a lot that you need to prove professionally. So it's more of like that personal itch of like solving problems for people.
It's what's enjoyable and interesting and fulfilling, and sure, there is always the next milestone, right? Like, Dapper was a very B2B business. Amitree is like a SMB business. So we have, almost 1,000x the number of customers. Sorry, 100x the number of customers we had at Dapper's. That'd be awesome. But so it's just a bigger scale in terms of like the number of people you're reaching. And so it's new challenges, new adventures, new itches to scratch, all within the same universe.
This is a little bit more personal, but I do think that this is important because I look at my life, and there's pivotal people that I've met along the way that have changed the trajectory of different paths. And I think like part of it is like picking up on different virtues from different people that I've started to instill as part of my value system. Has there been any of like kind of, I know you've had quite a few of those apparently, but anybody that kind of like stands out, maybe in the latter part of your life now, or more recent years that you've seen like, oh, this particular individual really like shifted a little bit in terms of like how I think about things?
There's been quite a few, but at Dapper, we were both pretty young founders, and so we from the beginning we kind of talked about eventually, when the business gets to a scale where it would be better served by a more professional CEO, we would hire a professional CEO, and we hired a professional CEO, and he and I had developed a great relationship at that time, and he was an amazing mentor to me, and then I brought him back in Amitree to coach me in the year that sort of led up to the change that we made. And yeah, I mean, I still see his influence on me. It's me, it's me, but like I see his influence on me and what I've learned from him so often. I got a lovely, lovely letter from someone on my team at the end of last year, and I could see like the feedback I was getting, the positive feedback I was getting. I was like, I know I learned that from James, like, and I went to him and I was like, like you helped me become this kind of leader. And at the core, it's because he cared about me. Like he saw me and he cared about me, and wanted to help me, and he was able to do it because he's good at it. But yeah, so like that, he's one of the more influential ones. But I've been influenced by some really great people along the way.
I have definitely had those relationships where like professionally and personally, but that have just like shaped, I think like a lot of who you are in terms, and it makes you a better person, and the outcomes become better, and and you may be living your life in a certain path, and you seeing things get better and rosier, and you don't necessarily know why, and then you think about it in moments, and you can go back and you're like, well, shit, I attribute it back to that. That's when this person came into my life, or that's when we started having that relationship. And it's like, I think that's yeah, it's really amazing, I think, to have those people and to meet those people. And I think it also goes back to maybe like you wanting the idea of people and everything, that going back into like how many lives can you touch, kind of feel like, I feel like you've been on the receiving end of some of those experiences, and you kind of want to dole it back out. So it kind of comes full circle, it seems like. We'd love to know your take in terms of like with Amitree, where do you see the business going in 5 years? Like, where would you like it to be? Is that another like successful exit, or is this something that you want to now spend like another 10, 15 years really realizing the full potential of what you started?
The future of the company is deeply intertwined with the future of how people are going to be working.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a lot of changes, obviously, over the last couple of years, and now we're going into a new chapter, and we're going to see how things play out. And I don't mean the simple stuff like work from home, not work from home. I mean people's kind of like orientation around how they spend their time, and the important role that work has in people's life, and how they derive satisfaction and fulfillment from their work.
Yeah.
Core to Amitree has always been the belief that the people out there are great at what they do and they love what they do. And it's our job to empower them. It's not our job to, make them redundant.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the robots are kind of coming for our jobs, not to be like all weird and dystopian about it. But,
not at all.
You're a real estate agent. You wake up every morning to the threat of disruption.
Yeah.
Every single home buyer who approaches you is like, why do I need this person? Like, can I just do this on the internet? And most will learn, if they had a good real estate agent, that they needed that person created a lot of value for them. And we need that in the world. We need people who are passionate about what they do and who bring value to others. And so the future of the company is intertwined with that concept of how do we unlock people's ability to spend almost all of their time doing the work that is meaningful to them, to buy back time to spend however they want, but hopefully in a way that's fulfilling to them.
Cool. On that note, Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today. It was really great to speak with you. Felt like you're just very, authentic and sincere and kind of a lot of just your own philosophies and your experiences. So very refreshing, different kind of conversation than, maybe some of the other ones we've had so far. So thanks for taking the time for doing this. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for including me, and thanks for, asking these interesting questions. It really got me thinking about a lot of these important things.
Cool. Thanks so much.